There are certain habits you have right now that are keeping you broke. So yes, today we're going to take some personal accountability for some of the things that we can actually control regarding our finances. And I use the word broke because broke can apply to you regardless of how much money you make. So let's say you're making $500,000 a year, but your expenses are also $500,000 a year. That means you're broke. You have no cash flow at all. And believe it or not, that's a lot more common than you may believe. Some of the highest earning people that you know of might be broke. Because the truth is, most people don't just have a money problem, they have bad money habits too. So today we're going to review 5 habits that are keeping you broke. So by the end of this video, you'll be able to identify exactly what you're doing wrong so you can make the necessary changes. The first bad habit is simply just spending more money than you actually make. And the challenging part about that habit is that it's so easy to do. So let's say you built up your savings to whatever you would consider to be a comfortable amount. Or maybe you just acquired a lump sum of money some kind of way. So what happens is that money becomes a safety net for you. And that safety net gives you a false sense of security. Because when we look at our bank account and see that dollar amount, we assume it's always going to be there. So because of that, we tend to lose the connection between our income and our expenses. So now every time we want to make a purchase and we know it's well beyond our income, we'll just justify it by saying we'll just pull it from our savings. And you don't even think twice about it because what you're spending is so insignificant to the amount of money you have saved up. And your mind is like taking a drop of water out of the ocean or something. And you figure it won't even be noticed. But if you've ever had money in savings and it kind of dwindled away over time, you know firsthand that those little purchases here and there add up. And over time, that big pile of money eventually runs out. And in addition to that, we're also constantly bombarded with offers to use money that we don't even have. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. And the number one culprit are credit card companies. They would love to let you borrow money from them so you can use it on a purchase, which is an even worse scenario. Because when you're using credit cards for additional expenses that you can't afford, it's not that you're depleting your savings, you're actually adding to your debt. And typically this debt comes with extremely high interest rates. And that's the main reason credit card companies give you such a low requirement for a minimum payment. Because most people just factor in that minimum payment into their budget thinking like, oh, I can afford that extra, $80 a month now. And they somehow forget to account for the total amount that they spent. So even though you're paying that monthly payment on time every single month, you're still able to rack up hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in debt. So it's extremely important not to spend more money than you actually earn. All right, now the next thing I want to talk about that's keeping you broke is keeping up with the Joneses, or at least attempting to keep up with the Joneses. And the Joneses are just a metaphor for our friends and our family, that's all. Because quite often, we actually run into so much pressure to do exactly what our friends are doing. And I know that may sound juvenile, but it actually affects adults just as much. And in some cases, it's on a bigger scale because the financial resources of an adult is a lot more than what a child would have. So here's what happens. You're going through your day, scrolling through social media, and you run across a post of one of your friends or family members, and they just said they just bought a brand new car. And your first thought is, how the heck can they afford a car? Because you're not even sure if you could even afford a car. Then you go to the comment section and you see all the people admiring them for their purchase and giving them praise and all this recognition. Then immediately you start thinking about the age and the condition of the car that you're driving right now. And then you start running through all the ways a new car will make your life so much better, things will be so much easier. And then guess what happens? You end up buying that new car. And you may not want to admit it, but it was simply just to keep up with your friend. Sometimes the competition between friends and families gets way too much for you to handle. And the same thing goes for homes, clothes, vacations, and even mobile devices. Think about how many times you actually upgraded your phone simply because there was a new upgrade available. This can actually cause you to buy a new phone almost every year. So just know that keeping up with the Joneses is an extremely bad habit that will definitely keep you broke. Next is simply not having an emergency fund. Bankrate published a survey showing that 51% of Americans have less than 3 months worth of expenses covered in an emergency fund. And 25% of people don't have an emergency fund at all. And an emergency fund is exactly what it sounds like. It's just money you have set aside strictly for emergency events. And one thing we know about life for sure is that emergencies will always come up. A solid emergency fund is about 6 to 12 months of your expenses set aside. And that's not including your normal savings or investments. Examples of emergencies are if something goes wrong with your house and you need to get it repaired, or maybe you got to take your car to the mechanic, or maybe there's a medical emergency that came up, or even loss of employment. And just because you don't have an emergency fund doesn't mean these life events won't happen to you. The emergencies will happen regardless. The difference is if you're not prepared financially, what happens is you end up going into debt to pay for the emergency. And we already know when trying to not be broke, you have to stay away from debt. The next bad habit that's keeping you broke is not separating your wants from your needs. Needs are things you can't survive without having. These are absolute necessities. Things like food, clothes, and housing are considered necessities. Because no matter how much we want to budget, we're going to have to eat. We'll also need clothes on our back, and we'll need a roof over our head. Now, where it gets tricky is when we add wants to the equation. A lot of times we look at things that are part of our life as needs when they're actually wants because we can't really picture life without having it. But in actuality, they're wants. Wants are things that we can actually do without. We don't actually need them to survive, but having them improves our quality of life or improves our circumstances. And that's the main reason we get tricked into looking at these things as if they're needs. Now, using the previous examples I gave, food is definitely a need. There's no question about that at all. However, food can become a want when it's in the form of dining out. And trust me, I know life gets really busy and eating out can be a major convenience at times. But even with that being said, it's still a want and not a need. And to take it even further, even cooking at home can be considered a want under certain circumstances. And it mainly depends on the certain groceries that you're purchasing. So don't be fooled to believe that just because you went to the grocery store and bought it and you're cooking it at home, that is considered a need. Here's a perfect example. Cooking things like expensive steaks, lobsters, crab legs can definitely cross the line from needs to wants. And by no means am I saying you can't have these things. What I'm saying is that you have to make an honest assessment of the things that you're purchasing, which means you have to be able to truly identify if something is a need or if it's a want. And the same thing goes for designer clothes, shoes, or expensive homes. Just because you need some shoes for the gym doesn't mean you have to go out and buy the ones that cost $200. That's the awareness I'm referring to. And another area keeping you broke is not making more money. It's one thing to manage your expenses, but if you can find a way to both manage your expenses and increase your income, it would dramatically improve your financial situation. Because the truth is, when it comes to budgeting, there's only so much you can do. Eventually, you'll run into a limit for how much money you can actually cut out your budget. However, there's no cap when it comes to making additional money. Sometimes a quick solution is just to pile on a bunch of overtime at your job, but I would highly recommend finding another route other than doing that. Now, it may cause you to have to get outside your comfort zone though. But remember, all your big goals are always located right outside your comfort zone. And a lot of times we've been at our job so long, it just feels like it's part of our identity. So it's important to understand that you are not what you do. Who you are and what you do are completely separate from each other. And I'm aware the thought of switching careers can be nerve-wracking, but I would definitely say go ahead and get out there and start exploring your options. And maybe it's not actually leaving your job, but instead exploring some type of entrepreneur endeavor on the side. Either way, increasing your income will play a dramatic role in keeping you from becoming broke. So that's all I have for you, and I hope I was able to add some value today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in this next video.